I think, there are few important trends that we have seen. Firstly, students, becoming more cost conscious and ROI, conscious.
Definitely.
That is driven by the fact that, due to the sort of economic conditions, the sort of disposable income levels probably have not grown that much. And that has resulted in students asking the most fundamental question is that out of this education, what will I get? But now, a lot of things have changed. You have, let's say if you're planning to study, business, or you're planning to study economics and, something of those courses, there are other universities in other locations that are now appealing. The other is obviously the immigration policies which are there. Some countries in certain years have taken much more harsher stance. So, for example, Germany is one destination that we are seeing. So for students, the most important thing, should be safety. Because student is actually going out of their home, mostly the first time, or probably they are searching for an accommodation the first time. Then, last could be around the facilities which are there in the accommodation. So obviously you don't need a spa in an accommodation. There are accommodations that are offering that. But then at least just filter down which are the most important ones you need. For example, at least there should be a quiet place in the building where you can study. There are options which are available in most cities.
Hello and welcome back to Acadfly's podcast, where we speak with leaders and change makers in the study abroad industry. I am Shatakshi Singh, and today joining us is the CEO and co-founder of Amber, Saurabh Goyal. Saurabh, thanks for joining the podcast.
Appreciate.
Yeah. Amber is one of the leading platform where they help students in the accommodation across the world. And in today's podcast, we are going to talk about Amber's journey, Saurabh's journey, and the evolving market of study abroad and the accommodation sector as well. Welcome to the podcast. Keep watching the podcast. And my very first question from you, Saurabh, is that how did the idea of Amber came in your mind? How it started?
So first of all, Shatakshi, thanks for having me, in this podcast. So, the story of Amber is quite interesting. It's been a couple of years since we started Amber. But in fact, when we, this is back in 2016. And in fact, I myself was planning to study abroad. And, just during that process, I connected with a couple of my friends, who were in the same process, who were, going through the same sort of journey and, just try to understand what the whole process is. But during the same time, I sort of just out of curiosity, some friends reached out to me, regarding accommodation, that they were finding it difficult to book housing. In US, yeah.
Okay.
In fact, I had worked in housing.com before. I had worked there for almost a year's time. So I knew about the rental market, how that essentially works online. So, decided to help them out. I, got connected to a couple of brokers in the US. And, during that time, I realized that I could sort of be a broker and help these students or friends out. In fact, at that time, we had shut down our previous venture. So, we were anyways sort of jobless. Okay. So, it was a means for survival or like a pocket money gig for us. So that happened for 2 years. In fact, that's, was so important for us because that gave a very good, understanding of the market and the customer firsthand.
Exactly.
I remember, during that time that, our true callers were changed to Saurabh Broker and Madhur Broker because students were or friends were really seeing us as broker. They would say, "Ki, yaar, ye broker ka number hai, tum isse baat kar lo," and they will sort your housing out. So that's how the initial 2 years went.
So this is what timeline when you guys were doing this broker thing?
So it was between 2016 and 2018.
Okay, so it's since 2016 to 2025. How have you, how you see the market evolving in these years?
Right. So the market, has changed a lot. I guess, the market that we are in, is inherently global in nature, right? What we, actually see is that, it's a market where it's like, human capital movement across the globe.
Definitely.
So every now and then, there are a lot of trends which are there in the industry. In fact, in the last 5 years, the amount of change which has happened is more than, the change which has happened over a couple of decades, right? In fact, from the post-pandemic era to now, we have seen so much happening across the global macroeconomic, landscape that has definitely impacted the sector a lot. We can probably talk a lot. It's a very in-depth topic.
Yeah.
But I think there are few important trends that we have seen. Firstly, students becoming more cost conscious and ROI conscious.
Definitely.
That is driven by the fact that due to the sort of economic conditions, the sort of disposable income levels probably have not grown that much, and that has resulted in students asking the most fundamental question: is that out of this education, what will I get? And that has led to students seeking for alternate courses and different destinations. Second thing is what we have seen is there are courses which are more hybrid in nature, where it's combining both online and offline kind of mix, where the student maybe are doing some part of it online and some part of it offline. This was not there, maybe 5 years before, right? So that's a major shift that has happened. And the last thing is, with respect to the other aspects of education, which is, for example, housing or your living experience. We have seen students giving more importance to that. More or less, in a lot of cases, the accommodation or your living is influencing your decision more than ever. A lot of cases, people will evaluate the university quality of education, but also what is their living experience there before making that choice. So I think it's multiple things have changed, but obviously the core fundamental aspect, a student moving to a different country or region in search of better opportunities, that is still unchanged.
Exactly. Since you also have been a student who has studied abroad, right? So how do you see this market changing, the study abroad market I'm specifically talking about?
I have not studied abroad. I planned to, to study abroad.
Okay.
But, I didn't sort of go there. Instead, I, started AMBIT.
Okay.
But again, to your question that how it is sort of...
evolving in the last 5 years, if we talk about.
Yes. So I think the broad points, as I mentioned, that, it's around 2-3 areas. The course changes, the destination being changed. One important aspect that we have also seen is the rise of alternate destinations. Historically, it's been US, UK, Australia that have dominated the international education, landscape. Again, that is given by, the strong fundamentals, for example, good universities or high quality universities, good job prospects after that. But now, a lot of things have changed. You have, let's say if you're planning to study, business, or you're planning to study economics and, something of those courses, there are other universities in other locations that are now appealing. The other is obviously the immigration policies which are there. Some countries in certain years have taken much more harsher stance. So, students have no options but to look, to other destinations. And, lastly, it's around the job market, that has also evolved. Probably if I just look at, let's say, a US or a UK, relatively speaking, compared to how it was 10-15 years back, that has also changed a lot. You will have countries like Germany, France, Spain, they are offering again lucrative post-education work opportunities. So, I would say in terms of, the traditional, countries that the student used to go to, that is also expanding. And that's, I think that's a sign of maturity that, there are more options available to these students.
Definitely. So since we're talking about COVID, the changes, there are certain global changes which happened in these years, right? So how it has impacted the student mobility?
Right. So, there is a lot of impact, again, going back to the point that we are in a sector which is around human capital movement, that too across countries, right?
Yes.
So if you look at the last 5 years, we have seen obviously pandemic being a very big blow to, how people travel. It just brought everything down to a halt for almost, year or 2 year time.
2 years,
So that definitely impacted. But post-pandemic, we saw a resurgence, a sudden rise, in people who were not able to go abroad in those years. But after that, we have seen a lot of things happen globally in terms of, the war situations happening in certain countries. We seeing Brexit, which was just happened around that time. We also saw, certain countries running into election years, and we have seen election years. There is always a massive turbulence that happens when it comes to any sort of immigration policy. Right? And then I think, globally, a rise in inflation, in certain countries going into recession, or, that kind of environment getting created. So, we have seen definitely a massive shift. And, as I mentioned earlier, that it's the last 5 years, have been more sort of change than compared to even, how, it has changed in decades, right? So it's a very, different time. I would say it's a very interesting time as well. Uh, but that being said, the fundamental, which is, the long-term aspect that, on one side, there is a huge demand for skilled workforce. On the other side, countries like India, there is a huge skilled, workforce which is available. So
Yeah.
I think that migration will sort of continue to happen. But in the short run, there are always fluctuations around certain country, becoming higher in numbers, certain country decreasing. But the sum total is always growing. That's that's how we see it.
Okay. Saurabh, abhi recently you said कि there's a lot of discovery of new countries, है ना?
Yes.
Students are discovering new countries कि
Right.
यार US, UK, Australia के अलावा भी कहीं जाया जा सकता है.
Right.
So what are the new destinations? मतलब since you are in the accommodation business,
Yes.
are there any new destinations which are students are discovering, and why so?
Right. So again, from the student perspective, for them, it's like couple of factors which matter a lot. One is, the quality of education, and obviously the course that they plan to do. The second thing is around, the cost it takes and whether they are able to afford it or not.
Yeah.
And third is obviously the post-work opportunities which are there. So every destination which is there, offers a unique blend of these. So, it's not like one size fits all. But in the last few years, we have seen a lot of changes around, maybe specific countries on the post-work visa side, or maybe on the cost side. Certain countries have become more expensive, right? So I think there are some alternate destinations that have now are growing more rapidly. So, for example, Germany is one destination that we are seeing a lot of interest coming in. Specifically, Germany, is appealing because of the engineering, focused education which is there, and also,
That's lower tuition fees also. Is a
yes,
major factor.
I think relatively, it's less fees. And then post work, they have a large manufacturing, engineering focused industry where, the skilled workforce can be employed. So I think Germany is one destination. Then you talk about Spain, France. They are all, again, having good colleges for business side of things, economics or law. So those are also very good destinations that students are looking at. Then there are smaller destinations like Dubai, Singapore, where you have a lot of global campuses being set up. That instead of going to UK or US, you can study in a university campus opened by a UK university in Dubai or Singapore. Right?
Definitely.
So that's these are a couple of locations that we are seeing which are coming up. And for students, the three important aspects, they are just making their decision basis that.
Okay. Since we are now talking about students, and Physics Wala and Acadfly is totally, student centric. So then my question is that what factors should students consider while choosing an accommodation? Or even if I'll talk country-wise,
Right.
then what factors should be considered if you're choosing a specific country?
Right. So I think it's two part of the question. First is when it comes to choosing an
Certain
accommodation.
accommodation, yeah.
So
A specific property, you said.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
So for students, the most important thing, should be safety, because student is actually going out of their home, mostly the first time, or probably they are searching for an accommodation the first time. So and given, I mean, obviously, safety part is something, which can be, if you've not sort of planned it accordingly, it can really hamper or could be very devastating. So for students, safety is the most important aspect, that you have to make sure the accommodation that you're finalizing is located in a place which is, or a neighborhood which is, safer,
Yeah.
or relatively safer.
Yeah.
And, you have to make sure that, accommodation itself is offering a lot of, has a lot of these security aspects, at least, there is some sort of CCTV surveillance, or there is some sort of, secured, fencing around the accommodation. Because we have heard a lot of stories of students where, they have not had the best experience if they have, gone ahead and chosen accommodation which is not safe. Yeah. So I think safety is one important aspect. The second thing is, obviously your budget side of things. You have accommodations ranging from, maybe couple of £100 per week to even higher, right? So, you have to make sure that it's not causing a lot of burden on your finances. Even if you're on a loan, that is even more important. So budget is the second thing. Third thing I would say is the proximity to your university, or maybe the commute times from that accommodation.
Obviously.
Again, there are accommodations options available all across. The ones which are nearer might be expensive, but the ones which are far may take a lot of time. But you have to find that sweet spot, that whatever works for you.
And then again, you have to pay for travel expenses, also
exactly.
a factor.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Exactly.
All right.
So these are a couple of things, and then last could be around the facilities which are there in the accommodation. So obviously you don't need a spa in an accommodation. There are accommodations that are offering that, but then at least just filter down which are the most important ones you need. For example, at least there should be a quiet place in the building where you can study, or maybe access to a library, maybe a gymnasium if you want to, if you're a person who wants to keep fit, and maybe some places where you can order food from nearby. So I think the basic, all the basic utility based checks should be there. And then if you are very particular about some things, there are options which are available in most cities.
Yeah. So Amber, being the leader of the industry, like housing industry, my question is now regarding the future of the study abroad industry. How do you foresee, what trends do you foresee in the next 5 to 10 years in the study abroad industry?
Right. So overall, in the study abroad industry, we have seen that, it has grown massively when we see the last 20-25 years. The last 5 years, we have seen a lot of change which is happening. Right. But if we talk about the next 5 to 10 years, at an overall level, the macro still remains strong. There will, again, as I mentioned earlier, that there is always a delta in terms of the supply and demand. If you were to just sort of look at it from that perspective, that on one side you have a lot of demand for international students and maybe the job part as well, or skilled workforce. And on the other side, countries like India, there is a large young population, ambitious, who's looking to sort of learn a lot and then sort of work. So I think there is a very natural demand and supply which is there. So long term, I mean, this sector has continued to grow, and it will continue to grow for the next coming few decades. So that trend is not changing. What might change is just the composition. So in certain years, some countries might see a rise, whereas some countries might see a decline. So the composition of the students which are going to different destinations, that can that will change, or that can change over short span of time. But the sum aggregate of students which are going, let's say, outside from India, that will always continue to rise, at least in the next few decades.
All right. What do you think, that tuition fees or living expenses are going to be high, or there will be cost stabilization?
Right. So I feel on that side, Shatakshi, it is more around the global inflation which is causing a lot of this change. Obviously the fees has risen in the last couple of years. So that has more to do with the global macroeconomic scenario. Things generally have become expensive. Right? So so that is one factor that is playing out. But overall, I think this should be balanced by a lot of new destinations that are opening up. I'm sure, with these new destinations opening up, they will give a good amount of competition, to the already existing, destinations or universities which are there. So, I would say that will help balance out the cost. But I think, the cost of education will still be determined by, what option the student is pursuing than like a blanket level, increase or decrease.
Definitely. If we'll start talking about accommodations. Now my question is, how should a student find a better accommodation in a specific location? Suppose a student went to US or UK or any other country.
Right.
How should they find, like what should they do for finding an accommodation?
Right. So obviously you can visit Amber. I think that's, obviously it's biased coming from me, but obviously at Amber we have a lot of options available in all the major destinations that the student is going. But generally speaking, when it comes to accommodation, broadly students have 2-3 options which are available. One is the university accommodation or university halls. So those are available, but there are some pros and cons to it. the pros are that mostly university halls are located closer to the universities or inside the campus. So, the proximity factor is sorted. So you can easily commute between, the travel time is less.
Yeah.
But the downside is that a lot of these universities halls might be pretty old, right? So you might not get a lot of these, facilities which the newer accommodations, are offering. So that might be a downside. The other thing is that, in these accommodations, it might be a lot of shared rooms that you
Rooms,
get.
yeah.
So although for, freshers, it doesn't matter, at least it didn't matter for me. But for a lot of people, it could be that they want more privacy. So that might not be a fit for them. And lastly is that university housing is very limited.
Yeah.
In fact, in certain universities, the university housing is only there for 10% of the students which are studying in the universities. So high chance that you won't get a university accommodation, or you might get that only for first year, right? So you'll have to plan for, almost in all cases, you have to plan for accommodation which is off campus. So again, university housing is one thing which, if you get, maybe go for it. But in a lot of cases, you might not get. So you have to plan for alternatives. In terms of alternatives, you have the private or off-campus accommodation available. We have a lot of listings, in private space or off-campus space. And there, you have all the options available. In fact, it's not like one size fits all. Depending on the student preferences, you might find a place which is more suited for you. But and then you have the the landlord accommodation, which is those purely private single apartment or single house that you can get. So these are the 2-3 choices. The latter choice, which is the student the individual housing units, there the downside is that you might you'll have to book that by your own, right? So so in that case, you will have to deal with brokers. You might have to you might or might not get a rental agreement. So that is very unstructured and maybe unprofessional as well.
Yeah.
So our, my tip is that you try for university housing, but if you're not able to get, then, going into a well-managed private accommodation is a very good option.
All right. So if we talk about different countries, how does the cost vary from different countries? Accommodation cost
Yes.
vary from in different countries like UK, US, Germany, Australia,
Right.
whatever.
Cost does vary a lot. It varies country to country, but even more than that, within a country, it varies a lot.
Yeah, exactly.
So mostly, we would see it more like a city-wise basis. The first major criteria is in terms of, where the university is located. So, so if it is a big metro city or a big metropolitan city, it will always be higher, right? So it's just, maybe comparing a Bombay to a Chandigarh, right? So, Mumbai generally is expensive in every aspect. So you see the same trends happening when it comes to the accommodation cost. For instance, London is, roughly, if you were to go live in a central part of London, that might cost you for a single sort of smaller unit almost like 2,000 pounds per month, right? So that's the amount of, the rent that you pay. And then again, if you plan to in a smaller city in let's say UK or any other country, the cost may be half. So in a country itself, the cost can vary from being 2 to 2.5 times, right? I mean, that's the amount of difference which can be there, depending on the size or the city, right? Again, Australia, Sydney is expensive. In US, New York is expensive. So one thing is around which city that you're going. Within a city as well, there is a lot of difference. If you're living in the central part, for example, in London, you're living in maybe Westminster or London Zone 1. In Sydney, if you're living in the central business district. In New York, if you're living in Manhattan, right, it will obviously be expensive because generally the property rates are high. But then I think as a student, you can plan that out. If you live in the outer areas, given a lot of these cities offer a very fantastic public transport system, so you can easily commute. So if you plan or if you sort of live in the outer areas, then you can really slash your accommodation cost by half, right? So that's the smart way of doing it. So I think for anyone who's planning to manage their accommodation cost, I think maybe first would be maybe enrolling in a university which is not in a very metropolitan city. That can help you reduce cost. And second is that if you still happen to be university is in a large city,
Yeah.
then probably plan out your accommodation, which is located maybe a bit, away from the high rental localities. So I think that could be the two ways.
So it's not dependent on the country. Every country has several options
Yes.
to choose from.
Exactly.
All right.
Exactly.
Are there any hidden costs as well that students might be aware of? That okay, these things are also there, but students don't know it.
Right. Yes, absolutely. There are a lot of costs which are there when it comes to, your costs apart from rentals. So I won't say, it hidden, but, students sort of sometimes discover it, that, okay, before booking, that, okay, these are some additional costs which are there. One is obviously your deposit, which has to be paid when you book the accommodation. But apart from deposit, there could be charges like a brokerage charge, which we don't charge at Amber, but a lot of the other, brokers or individuals might,
They do charge.
do charge that. So I think, firstly, you should sort of check what is the deposit, if there is some additional charge which is there. And in terms of deposit, do make sure that, most deposits are refundable or it gets deducted from your rent. So do make sure that, you are getting the deposit back. So one is deposit. Again, it can vary from 2 weeks of rent to even 1 month of rent. That's a standard that is there across industry.
Like the security amount, which
It's the security
we
amount.
pay in
Yeah.
Noida as well, Delhi as well, NCR, everywhere.
Exactly,
Yeah. All
exactly.
right.
Second thing is the utility cost. For example, it could be the internet expense, it could be, the gymnasium charges, or it could be the gas bill, or, a lot of these other charges which are there.
Electricity bill,
Electricity and all.
water bill.
Yes. So again, in some or most accommodations that you book with Amber, these are all included.
Okay.
But in a lot of cases, this might not. So, it's very important that when you're budgeting, that, you sort of bifurcate it between that, what is the rental cost and what is the utility cost. In certain cases, when utility cost is not included, you might see the rental value is less. But then when you add the utility cost, it might really, bloat the cost. It can even go, it can also be almost 30% of your, monthly rental, which is there. So my advice is that, again, it's important that when you're booking, you are seeing that whether the rent amount is inclusive of these utility bills or it's exclusive, and then sort of taking a broad estimate of what, that cost could be. Last is around, some cost accommodations do charge, some sort of admin fee or check-in fee.
Okay.
This is less nowadays because a lot of this is now done through some sort of product or app. So there is no person which is required. But, there are some accommodations which are, charging some sort of check-in fee or admin fee. So I think these are the three major, costs which is there. So I think it's important that students, do sort of understand, these costs, because, this might be otherwise be a very shocking surprise to them.
Definitely.
When you're booking through Amber, we make sure that every cost is, sort of transparent. For example, in certain of our accommodations, there is even meals which are included, right?
Oh, okay.
So in that part, you can really plan out that, hey, I'm saving a lot because I'm getting the complete package when I'm booking in a certain accommodation.
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah, I think these are a couple of the points that, that we see is very important.
Since we spoke about the hidden charges, the hidden cost, whatever
Right,
is there,
right.
now I want to understand that, or the students want to understand that how should they plan their budget? Like, especially I'm talking about the accommodation and the living expenses. How should they plan according to you?
Right. So obviously budgeting is, very important. One thing that we have seen with students is that, let's say if they have done their bachelor or something, they at least have some idea of a basic budgeting plan that, hey, if you have gotten, this much, then how to sort of split it, right? Or at least run your budget. So obviously, the core budgeting thing remains the same, is that you just, calculate how much you want to spend and then bifurcate the cost according to it. In terms of your spends, after you have paid the university fees, which goes out in one tranche, the accommodation and living expenses can be a lot. Generally, what we've seen abroad is that, your accommodation or living accommodation expense itself can be roughly 50% of your tuition cost. So that could be, the level of, cost that you might incur. So my advice is that, firstly, you plan out that, hey, this is if you're taken a loan or not taken a loan, and more so if you've taken some sort of financing, that you plan out that this is the amount of budget that I have after paying my fees, and then you can just work your way backwards. You can define that, okay, I want to let's say finalize an accommodation which is in this sort of annual rent, because your accommodation is the largest expense. So I think that's one part is figuring out the accommodation which is right for your budget and within your budget. After that, I think the other expenses which are there, these are smaller expenses, but they do add up.
Yeah.
For example, your your travel cost, your food cost, this is all expensive when you are an Indian student going abroad.
Exactly.
So again, you need to plan that. There are some smart ways of doing it. For example, in terms of travel, you can take some student travel cards which are offered by universities, or take an accommodation that is closer to a metro station or a bus station, and then plan accordingly. You can save a lot from there. In terms of meals, if you're really on a budget, you can plan, maybe making your own meals. So maybe learn cooking, that could be one thing. Because again, food, if you're getting it from outside, it is generally expensive.
Yeah.
So I think these are 1-2 points, that we see. But the very important point is that for you firstly just budget it at the top level, and then plan your accommodation first, because that's the largest expense. And then the other things you can sort of plan. There are some smart ways of doing it.
All right. Since you told us the way and the process, whatever, of saving the budget, are there any affordable accommodations or options available which you will suggest?
Right. So I think in terms of accommodation, there are accommodations which are available, which are sort of cheaper.
Yeah.
For students, it's mostly choosing between the travel times versus the cost. Generally, what we have seen is that in every city you will find cheaper accommodations, but the location might be a bit maybe far off, right? So I think you should spend time initially when you're finalizing your accommodation, that you're looking at all the options which are available. For instance, in at Amber we have close to almost 200 plus accommodations which are there with us in London, for instance. And if you're a student who's studying in London, you can by the metro system or the tube system, you can reach anywhere across, right? So amongst these 200 accommodations, you will have accommodations in different price ranges. So it's really a matter of that if you're willing to maybe travel a bit, which might increase your travel times by maybe 15-20 minutes, you can plan an accommodation which is maybe located a bit relatively far, but you'll save a lot, right? You'll save almost, it could be 30-40% or even higher, in terms of it being cheaper compared to the options which are available. The other thing is that you can go for living in a shared setup. That can also help you manage cost. In a lot of accommodations, you have en suites available. So those are relatively cheaper. So again, any student who's on a budget, they can plan, going for a shared accommodation that can really help out.
Yeah.
And then lastly is, do check with your university housing. Generally, what we have seen is it's a bit expensive, but in certain university, it might be at a cheaper or a subsidized cost.
Yeah.
So that might also, be, sort of help you in terms of managing your budgets.
Budget. Okay. So I think we have covered almost everything. My last question is that we are constantly saying that student can live far from the campus.
Right.
And or either they have options to live near the campus.
Yes,
okay, that depends. That okay, the property which is near the campus will be a bit costlier, and the one which is away from the campus or somewhere from away from the city will be a bit cheaper.
Right.
All right. So what is bigger? The travel expense is bigger, or the cost is bigger where the student is living near the university?
Right. So,
what do you prefer personally?
So I would say that it really depends, very specific to where you're going.
Yeah.
Right. For example, in a city like London, the price differential can be very high. The central areas are very expensive. Right. So there it might be a good strategy that you live a bit far. Whereas in smaller cities, it's not a lot. And mostly the housing is located near the university. So, you can book near the universities. And if you book far, there is no a lot of advantage of doing that. So I would say it really depends on cities, but in large cities is where this factor, really plays out. Second thing is in terms of travel. Generally, if you're booking an accommodation which is maybe 30-40% cheaper, then even if you include the travel cost, it will be cheaper. Because travel, if you use any public transport, it is it is not it would cost less, right?
Yeah,
so for you, for any student, it would be, in most cases it would be cheaper. But then you have to, again, it's not one size fits all.
Yeah,
If your
exactly.
university courses are very intensive and you need to do a lot of back and forth, or generally if you have very less time, so to manage your travel, then again you have no option left. Right?
Exactly.
So I would say that's why when it comes to accommodation, it's a very personal or very subjective to every student, and that's why we suggest that you maybe check with us whenever you're booking, because we can sort of help you sort out
Yeah.
amongst all of these options before booking.
All right. So this comes, and here we came to the end of the podcast, and we almost got a clear picture of the accommodation industry and, moreover, study abroad industry as well. We discussed about the factors, we discussed about the parameters that students should consider while considering accommodation in a country. We spoke about the cheaper accommodations, we talked about the costlier accommodations as well. We have covered almost every aspect of the accommodation industry. Thank you, Saurabh. Thank you so much for giving us the insights of the accommodation industry. Thanks for joining us. And I hope you got a very clear picture. Still, if you have more questions from Saurabh or from us, tell us in the comment down below, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.